This video contains spoilers for The Rise of the Golden Idol, along with its first three DLCs, The Sins of New Wells, The Lemurian Phoenix, and The Age of Restraint. I don't usually put the spoiler warning before a video's intro like that, but as it happens, Heko Secunda's mere identity is a spoiler for the story of the games. Surprise, by the way, this was secretly a two-part character analysis for Heko Secunda and Oriel Tusant. Heko Secunda's first appearance is in the prologue of The Rise of the Golden Idol, where his consciousness has been copied over that of the Lemurian history professor Oriel Tusant. He's been put in a mental asylum and has decided to break out by killing an orderly, Morg Braca. Since the player has no context for what they're seeing at that point, they're left to falsely conclude that they're simply looking at a Lemurian history professor who has gone insane for unknown reasons. This is technically one of the only times the accepted solution to a case is untrue in a Golden Idol game. Whenever total memory override is involved in other parts of the game, the player's solution only counts as correct if they input the name of the person in control, not the original owner of the body. Oriel Tusant exists as his own character, appearing in later chapters that take place before the prologue chronologically. Unfortunately, he gets heavily overshadowed by Heko due to his consciousness being overwritten before he gets to do much of interest on screen. Because he mysteriously disappears for some time after his escape, Heko Secunda initially seems like he might be the main villain, but he turns out to be a red herring. He doesn't actually influence the story much until the first DLC, The Sins of New Wells, and we don't get to learn about his motivations until the third DLC, The Age of Restraint. The latter takes place in the ancient Lemurian Empire, where Heko is originally from, and whose culture and politics are crucial to his character. Who was Heko Secunda back in ancient Lemuria? Well, he was Heko Sift. That was his name, question answered. Alright, to understand Heko's character, we first need an idea of ancient Lemurian society, as explored in the third Rise DLC, The Age of Restraint. At this point in history, the Lemurian Empire is extremely technologically advanced, while the rest of the world's societies are largely hunter-gatherers, or Bronze Age states. Lemurians have flying ships, universal transfer devices, laser guns, and all sorts of other technologies that could be extremely dangerous in the wrong hands. We first see Heko in his role as a Lemurian sentinel, tasked with preventing the misuse of this technology. He lives in Lemuria's restraint era, in which sentinels and automatons are employed to protect Lemuria against itself, and there are strict rules on how technology is used. We don't know how someone becomes a sentinel, or why Heko became one, but it seems to be a lifelong calling, as sentinels have devices called veridolas embedded into their heads. These devices have gems socketed into them, which flash green when the wearer tells the truth, and red when they lie. In this way, sentinels, who act as enforcers of the principle of restraint, are themselves restrained. They must also follow a set of 4 statutes. If they break any of these, their powers as sentinels are revoked. The 4 statutes are 1. To avoid hypocrisy in their sacred mission. Handling unsanctioned technology outside of a sentinel's duties is forbidden. 2. To maintain the humility befitting their station. Seeking wealth or status beyond the purview of a sentinel's responsibilities is forbidden. 3. To follow the letter and spirit of the law. Any attempt by a sentinel to take the law into his or her own hands is forbidden. 4. To devote their attention fully to the work of cultivating a safe Lemuria. Allegiance to any outside cause or movement is forbidden. Heko sees all this restraint as unnecessary, and dreams of the Lemurian Empire as a great chained beast. He sees himself releasing this beast, allowing it to conquer the barbarians of other nations, and take its rightful place as ruler of the world. Essentially, he's a Lemurian nationalist. His plan for achieving this goal is surprisingly simple, having only 3 steps. First, he wants to use a device called a convincer to analyze his ideas and generate the most statistically likely arguments to convince people they are true. Second, he wants to transcribe the text of these arguments and use a quafizer to turn them into a liquid which causes this text to be memorized by anyone it comes into contact with. Finally, he will use a cloud printer to generate rain clouds copied from this liquid sample, which he will then spread across Lemuria, convincing people to lift the principle of restraint and use their technology to conquer the world. Before he can do any of this, Heko needs to secure these forbidden devices and escape the ship where he lives with the other sentinels. The first step of the process is to frame the ship's technician, Gim Kara, by tricking him into picking up a forbidden artifact which Heko smuggled onto the ship after confiscating it. Gim is caught holding the artifact and frozen in stasis, making Heko the new technician. Using this position, he intentionally misconfigures a Veridola so that instead of flashing green for true and red for false statements, it does the opposite. He then works with three criminals, codenamed Mr. Red, Mr. Blue, and Mr. Green, in order to fake his own death, help him escape, and steal the artifacts he needs, along with a universal transfer device. The plan is successful until it's time to disconnect Heko's Veridola from the ship's systems, which use it to track him at all times. Mr. Red gets shot in the leg and left behind. The Prime Sentinel Morin de Silva is killed, and while Heko and the other two escape with the transfer device and the artifacts, his tracking stays intact, and the other Sentinels chase after him. Spotting the Sentinel ship behind them, Heko, Mr. Blue, and Mr. Green hide in a factory where Heko cannot be tracked. While one of the Sentinels, Patala Kib, reprograms a massive mining robot to hunt and kill Heko, Mr. Blue and Mr. Green betray him. They want to get out of the factory with the artifacts, but they can't bring Heko due to his tracking device, and they can't kill him because they need his knowledge of the artifacts. Therefore, they use the universal transfer device to remove all of his memories, killing his body, before storing these memories on a data disk. They then try to teleport themselves away with a modified harvester, but this fuses their bodies together, killing them both. The climax of the story revolves around stopping the mining robot, whose rampage is unstoppable since it has no way to kill Heko. However, Heko's part in the story is over, as is his life in ancient Lemuria. Over the next few thousand years, Heko's consciousness remains trapped in the disk, dreaming of Lemurian supremacy while the Lemurian Empire burns down its own libraries and universities, destroying its advanced technology to avoid a greater catastrophe. In the 1970s, Heko is released into a world completely alien to him. This is done by accident, using the same universal transfer device that stored him on the disk, after it is rebuilt by a research team in a company called OPEG. This brings us to the events of the Rise of the Golden Idol base game. Before we can go over what happens to Heko at this point, we need to cover the person whose consciousness he overwrites, Oriel Tusant. Oriel Tusant is a professor of ancient Lemurian history, born sometime in the early to mid-1900s. He is likely either Albionian or Hesperian, nationalities which correspond to British and American respectively, though his last name suggests he may have heritage from Aquitania, the equivalent of France. Oriel's first appearance chronologically is around 1950, where in the epilogue of The Lemurian Phoenix, we see him talking to Tessa Navari in a bar in Albion. Tessa excitedly shows him the golden idol she found in Lemuria, only for him to point out the Made in Lanka label indicating it's just a cheap trinket. A lot of people speculate that Oriel and Tessa were married at some point, and use this scene in particular as evidence that they have a long history together. We know that by the 1970s, Tessa has an ex-husband who took a Lankan artifact from her in their divorce, so it's plausible that this could have been Oriel. We next see Oriel in 1974, when he and Tessa both attend the same auction for artifacts. Oriel tries and fails to win various Lemurian artifacts. The host is also murdered, but that's another story. A few years later, Oriel joins a research team working for OPIG as a consultant on ancient Lemurian history. Most of his work seems to be translating the input symbols on artifacts, but he also makes the unfortunate decision to participate in an experiment with disastrous consequences. This brings us back to Heko's memory disk, which by this point is in the custody of a museum, thanks to the aforementioned auction. Having reassembled Heko's universal transfer device after a long series of hijinks, the OPIG team has learned that it can transfer memories between human beings. They've also discovered how ancient Lemurian memory disks work, though they have yet to understand that they could store an entire lifetime of memories. According to a newspaper article, the disk has been identified as belonging to an ancient Lemurian named Heko Secunda. It's unclear how this information was discovered, but the name seems to be a modern translation of Heko Sift. The device is used to transfer a month of memories into Oriel Tusant, who recounts Heko's final moments. Okay, let's see. I appear to be some sort of sentinel. Heko Secunda is. My task is to protect Lemuria from itself. Fascinating. A beam of light connects me to some strange device. There's a gem on my forehead that was supposed to prevent me from lying, but I found a way to deceive it. I've become the very thing I was supposed to be fighting against. For that, I have suffered greatly. But I am not done yet. I will never surrender. I will make them pay. With the benefit of seeing what happened in Age of Restraint, we can understand the events Oriel is describing. The gem in Heko's head was the Veridola, and when he says he became that which he was supposed to fight against, he's admitting that he betrayed the Sentinels, both by misusing forbidden artifacts and by killing Morn de Silva. Despite his admittance of guilt, he still seems to have been resolved to achieve his goal, refusing to surrender. Seemingly influenced by Heko's personality as well as his own curiosity, Oriel demands that more memories be transferred to him. Jack Nowak, who is operating the device, tries layering the lenses which determine the length of memory transferred, expecting this will add their durations together. Instead, it multiplies them, and Oriel's mind is completely overridden by Heko's. For the most part, the character we're now following is Heko. There will be clues later that Oriel is still in there somewhere, but the memories, personality, and motivations of this person all appear to be Heko's. Heko, not sure where or when he is, or whether he's in danger, grabs a Vaporon from a nearby display case, recognizing it as a weapon from his time. However, it fails to fire, so he instead grabs a spear from a statue and throws it at a security guard before running away. Not long after, he gets arrested and placed in the Redwood Asylum, his captors believing he is still Oriel Tusant and that he has lost his mind. Just as we see in the game's prologue, Heko chews through the strap of his straitjacket, uses it to kill a guard, and makes his escape. He also steals a scooter on the way. Heko then stays in hiding for a few months. We don't see what he does during this time, but he manages to track down the reconstructed universal transfer device which brought him back. He follows it to a TV studio, only to see it thrown out the window, destroying it. He rushes to scavenge intact parts from it, such as the crystal it uses, but with its lenses broken, it can no longer transfer memories. Instead of rebuilding the original device, he improvises a new one, the Disarranger. Instead of transferring heat, matter, and memory, this device scrambles them, using the sound waves instead of light. One day, when Heko is hungry, he goes to a drive-through restaurant and steals an order of food from a waitress as she's carrying it to a customer. Unbeknownst to Heko, this restaurant is a front for a drug-dealing operation, and he has just stolen some of their product. The nearby gangsters who run the operation drive after him, up to a rooftop where he uses the Disarranger to knock down a water tower, killing one of them. He also removes one of their hands. Eventually, the gangsters catch him and bring him to their boss, Hildegard Bauer. In return for sparing his life, Heko offers her power in the form of the Disarranger. She agrees, and he begins work on amplifying the device's power. Heko is forced to accelerate his research when the city's mayor learns about Hildegard's criminal activities, and prepares to expose her in a press release. He finishes testing the device's ability to scramble memories right before his workshop is raided by the police, forcing him and the gangsters to make a narrow escape. On the day of the mayor's press release, Hildegard and Heko plan to use the Disarranger to permanently scramble the mayor's memories, making her incapable of explaining what Hildegard has been doing. The microphone the mayor plans to use for her speech is turned into a speaker by one of the gangsters in disguise, and a transmitter is attached so that the sound from the Disarranger can be sent through it. However, Detective Roy Sampson thwarts this plan by shooting the microphone with a gun, saving the mayor. Immediately afterwards, the police find Hildegard, Heko, and the gangsters in an abandoned building. Heko uses the Disarranger to escape through a wall, passing through an alleyway into another building. Roy Sampson spots the holes in the wall through the alley, and follows Heko into a clothing store where they have their final showdown. Heko ambushes Roy, and they both knock off each other's headphones in the scuffle. Heko takes Roy's gun and prepares to shoot him, but Roy activates the Disarranger. While it charges up, Roy takes his gun back, shooting the Disarranger just as it scrambles both their memories. After Heko's memories are scrambled, he says, "Am I historian or history?" This makes it seem like the scrambling uncovered Oriel's mind to some extent. In the aftermath, he is once again identified as Oriel Tusant and institutionalized. He begins writing a book about his story, and comes to peace with the fact that his dreams of Lemurian supremacy will never come to pass. He considers modern Lemurians weak, and decides it might be best that neither they nor the barbarians have access to Lemurian technology. I don't think this is too complicated, but I'll go ahead and explain my reasoning. Heko's dream is for Lemuria to become an expansionist, dominating force which rules over the rest of the world's people, whom Heko views as barbarians. In the epilogue, he does allude to Lemurian technology helping a lot of people, but I think the text of the games makes it clear that this is a justification, not his actual goal. There's no explicit indication that Heko's ideal conquest would be a military one, and given the gap in technology, it's unlikely Lemuria would need to kill a single person to conquer the world. Still, Heko seems to believe in intrinsic Lemurian supremacy and the right to dominate the barbarians of the world. Like so many villains in the Golden Idol universe, his primary motivation is a desire for power, with any benefits being secondary. Motivations aside, Heko shows a noticeable lack of moral consideration in his actions. Ironically, though, he shows the most restraint during his plot to lift the principle of restraint. While he does get Gim Gim Kara frozen in stasis on purpose, he doesn't initially plan to kill Morn de Silva during his heist of the ship, and this only happens after one of his criminal partners makes a mistake. It seems like he preferred to execute his plan without shedding any Lemurian blood. Once he's in the modern world, surrounded by barbarians, though, all bets are off. He doesn't hesitate to try to kill Rowan Doyle with a Vaporon, nor to throw a spear at him. He also kills Morg Braca to escape the asylum rather than trying to pickpocket his key or something, and causes all kinds of harm with the disarranger. He seems to care significantly less about the lives of barbarians than his fellow Lemurians, which is in line with his ideology. In particular, what Heko says in the epilogue drives home this sense of supremacy. He states it's best that barbarians don't have access to the fruits of Lemurian technology, showing that he thinks the ancient Lemurians had a right to rule due to some inherent superiority that had nothing to do with their access to technology. Contrasted with his other statement that the technology could have helped people, it's clear that helping the barbarians in particular was never an important goal to him. In addition to having a supremacist ideology, Heko Sift holds the same kind of dangerous ambitions that made the principle of restraint necessary. His plan is very similar to that of Jack Nowak in Rise of the Golden Idol, who wants to use a universal transfer device to override the memories of millions of people with that of his uncle, using a televised broadcast. In the same way, Heko intends to hijack a normally harmless medium, in this case rain, to change what's in the minds of people everywhere in order to remake the world according to his ideals. The creative use of banned devices to completely transform the world perfectly represents the terrifying power of Lemurian technology that the Sentinels were tasked with protecting against. Just as he said, Heko Sift really did become the very thing he was supposed to fight. So, Heko Sift was most likely evil, but the other Sentinels, in their zealous adherence to the principle of restraint, were morally questionable in other ways. On the one hand, the events of the Golden Idol series demonstrate that no one is capable of handling unrestricted access to Lemurian technology without doing terrible things, so restricting it is very justified. On the other hand, withholding what they have from non-Lemurians in particular is extremely elitist and selfish. If Heko's motivations were shown differently, I might have considered his goals to be morally defensible. After all, the various human societies of the world were all technologically in the Bronze Ages or earlier, and access to Lemurian technology could have made their lives longer and happier, as well as giving them tools to better express and maintain their respective cultures. It's not explicitly stated in the games, but I got the impression part of the principle of restraint was that Lemuria couldn't share its technology with other societies for fear of endangering or transforming them. This is sort of hinted at by the existence of buffer societies between Lemuria and the rest of the world. To be clear, I don't necessarily think the Sentinels are wrong for taking authoritarian measures in Lemuria. As off-putting as things like embedded veridolas and memory recording trackers are, these are restraints that the Sentinels primarily seem to apply to themselves in order to prevent abuses of power. While they look like a high-tech police force, the Sentinels' function is basically just to enforce health and safety regulations. Their so-called inquisitions are the equivalent of someone in our world going around arresting people for putting asbestos in water bottles or dumping toxic waste in rivers or whatever. While Lemuria's Age of Restraint seems to be full of social tension, it's hardly what I would call dystopian, even if it looks that way at first. Far more concerning is the fact that the Sentinels maintain a state of affairs in which most of the world's people must struggle through all the stages of technological development between themselves and the Lemurian Empire. The idea that they can't handle Lemurian technology even the limited kind that ordinary Lemurians have, like harvesters, is elitist in the same way as Heko's belief that Lemurians should rule over them. To be fair, this might not be the fault of the Sentinels themselves, but rather of Lemurian society as a whole. Still, the Sentinels are the only representation we see of the Lemurian status quo, and they don't seem to have any interest in challenging it. Regardless of their complicity in hoarding technology, most of the Sentinels seem to be ordinary people just trying to do their jobs, with the exceptions of Morn de Silva and Patala Kib. Morn de Silva, the Prime Sentinel, appears to take his calling extremely seriously from what little dialogue he has. The same goes for Patala, except that she ends up betraying her principles, much like Heko. Patala is the one who sends the mining robot after Heko, as I mentioned earlier. Due to how she programs it, she inadvertently sets it on an endless rampage, only to be stopped by Etham Lurvel, whom she and the other Sentinels arrested as a criminal. Patala ends up among those captured by the robot, sucked into its insides through tubes it uses to get non-targeted people out of the way. As another Sentinel, Bethab's Dowberry, shouts that the situation is all Patala's fault, which the Veridola confirms to be true, Patala retorts that she did what she did in the name of the law. However, her Veridola reveals this to be a lie. Patala has become a criminal by violating the third statute of restraint, taking the law into her own hands and acting not out of a duty to protect Lemuria, but out of anger and a personal desire to avenge Morn's death. In her wrath, Patala too became that which she was tasked to protect against. Now that I've explored Heko's betrayal of the Sentinels, their flawed attempts to enforce the principle of restraint, and the consequent collapse of the Lemurian Empire, we can get back to exploring a much more grounded character, the unfortunate professor of ancient Lemurian history, whose academic career choice turned out far more dangerous than he could reasonably have expected. As I mentioned before, Oriel Tusant sadly doesn't get many opportunities to shine before Heko overwrites him. From what we do see, however, he seems level-headed and reasonable, if a bit detached. His notes about Tessa's reconstruction of the Golden Idol appear in a new light, knowing they had some kind of prior relationship. His dismissal of her attempts at translating ancient Lemurian might be influenced by some bitterness towards her, although we do know in hindsight that he's correct. On the other hand, perhaps some of his excitement that he expresses in his notes stems from how happy he is that Tessa has, to some extent, finally achieved her dream of reassembling the fabled Golden Idol, even if she didn't quite put the pieces together correctly. Given that Oriel is apparently still in there somewhere after getting overwritten, based on the dialogue at the end of The Sins of New Wells, Heko's dialogue in the prologue takes on a new meaning. He says prom Nepal prom, which is usually translated as stop mind stop. This suggests that Oriel is fighting back against Heko in times like these, unable to take control of his body from the ancient sentinel controlling him. In that case, it could be that the disarranger made the two of them equal participants controlling the same body. Even their bodies' pose after having their memories scrambled seems to reflect this, with the right and left limbs doing mismatched movements, while Roy Sampson simply falls to his knees. Assuming this is what happened, it gives us some solace about the fate of this unfortunate professor. It means that what we see at the end of Age of Restraint, when Heko is musing on the fate of Lemuria, is not simply him talking to himself, but having a dialogue with Oriel Tusant, and the two of them coming to an agreement that things turned out for the best. It's certainly a bittersweet ending. We can only hope that the two of them, a Lemurian nationalist and a barbarian who studied the greatness of the Lemurian Empire, found some semblance of peace amongst themselves. With the end of Heko's story comes the end of a much larger story about the terrible power of ancient Lemurian technology. Roy Sampson, who might be considered an honorary sentinel, has destroyed the Disarranger, the last known Lemurian artifact, and one which almost certainly would have been forbidden in Heko's time. Though he certainly didn't deserve his fate, Oriel Tusant found what he was looking for in a perverse way. He uncovered the truth of ancient Lemuria, the peerless empire he devoted his career to studying. Historian or history, the story of these two very different souls in one body ends with laying to rest the dreams and nightmares of Lemuria's glorious past in favor of a future led by the barbarians, who must continue to innovate on their own, as well as learn to balance their ambition with the restraint as their forebears failed to do. Thank you for watching my video. It was a bit awkward to weave together the stories of Heko and Oriel, and it was complicated by the fact that Heko, or Echo Secunda, practically lives a separate life in Rise of the Golden Idol and the first DLC from what we see of him in the third DLC. Hopefully you were able to follow along through all the convoluted plot points and enjoy the video. See you next time!